today we're going to be talking about converging with compassion and care. And this is all anchored, this concept of neighbor is anchored in the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is recounted in the Gospel of Luke. And so just to give us a recap there, we had a week off, so just make sure everyone's back to where we started here to know what we're talking about today. In that parable, there's a teacher of the law, and he's openly testing Jesus. It says in the way that he approaches him, he's testing Jesus on what must I do to inherit eternal life. And he approaches him, and he flips the script on him, as Jesus often does, and says, how do you interpret the law? Just love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he tries to catch him on this and says, but who is my neighbor? And he tells this story that I'd like to read from Luke chapter 10. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side of the road. And so too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for the extra expense you may have. And so Jesus ends this story and he turns to this teacher of the law and says, so who was the neighbor? And he begrudgingly has to say it's the Samaritan, because there's this cultural battle there. And he said, it's not as important of what my outward appearance is. So we may ask this question sometimes, do I look like I care? And maybe if you're Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation, we hear this phrase said, maybe even said it ourselves, but when we say it, it's usually sarcastic. It's that my outward appearance is so obviously represents my internal motivations of like, I don't care that much. The phrase aligns this. But what I want to talk about today is when our outward appearance or our outward expression does not actually match how we act and how we follow up on that. You know, look like I care. I'm not so sure that Jesus wants us to look or appear to be caring as much to be caring. So before we dig in, let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to study the Word. I just pray that you help push me aside so that your truth would be delivered today. I pray for all of us listening, that you would soften our hearts and open our minds to your truth, and that as we wrestle with your word to put it into action, that you would stay any distractions from the enemy so that we could stay focused on you and building the kingdom. Amen. All right, so converging with compassion and care. I love that. It's not even my title, but it's perfect. It's compassion first, then care. Compassion first, care second. So let's go back to the parable. I've got a map up here, which is the route from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's about 18 miles. By foot, it would take you most of the day, like a full work day, to transpose that, to move across that. So it's interesting, right? Because we're going north, and Mitch talked about this a little bit. We're going north, but it says I went down to Jericho. So it's an 18-mile trek, but you go almost a mile. It's like 7/10 of a mile in vertical elevation drop. So I'm going literally downhill. So I went down to Jericho from Jerusalem, which you see on the left, Jericho up in the northeast corner there. Kind of funny, I pulled this from Google Maps. Just below Jericho is a water park that I'm sure wasn't there at this time. So don't mind that. But Jericho is really interesting. It's one of the longest continuously settled cities on Earth. So they have archaeological evidence going back to 9,000 BC, but also some of that evidence in more recent times supported the claim that there was a large priestly population there. So there was, and John Wesley wrote in his notes about the Gospel of St. Luke, that there was about 12,000 priests and Levites that dwelt there, and who all attended service at the temple. So this priest is coming home from work, coming home from church, basically. And there was a population, about 12,000. A good portion of the city would regularly make this trip to go serve in the temple. And when they were done serving in the temple, they would go back to Jericho. So up to Jerusalem, down to Jericho. So this is a pretty common trip. So it's interesting. In our time, we read it as road to Jericho. For the people receiving the message, they understood this very well. The man on the side of the road could very well have been a Levite or a priest, also traversing back to Jericho. So this could have been one of his brothers, one of his kinfolk there. So pull up this picture of the road to Jericho. What's interesting, when we think about road, this is not Center Ave, right? This is not a four-lane paved road. At portions of the road to Jericho, it's a little less than 5 feet wide, a footpath. So let's put this story into a little bit more context. There's a man beaten, stripped, bloody, lying there to die, and a priest walks by on the other side of the road. When they walk by on the other side of the road, they may have to actually step over one of his appendages. It's not like they're a block away from this man. This story comes to life a little bit more when you read into it, when you dig into this. And we say, how could they do that? How could a priest step over that? What if it was today's analogy? So we're not going to be walking 18 miles home from church. You're leaving church today. We're in a rush to go do things. We got to catch up on football. We have to do laundry or grocery shopping. We have to decorate for Halloween, whatever it is that you have planned this afternoon. And you're driving along, and on the side of the road, another car's broken down. Maybe window smashed in, flat tire. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, the priest, the church-going population, they change lanes so they don't have to make eye contact with the person. Jesus is really like poking his finger into the eye of the religious elite right here. And that's where I would really want us to think about this when we talk about converging with compassion and care. It's not about looking like we care, about looking like we have compassion. It's about having compassion. It says in that passage from Matthew, when the Samaritan saw him, he took pity on him. So the definition for compassion is sympathetic pity, concern for the sufferings or misfortune of others. Actual concern for the misfortunes of others that we have. And if we read in the scriptures, we see so evidently that God and Jesus, and when he is manifested on earth, are characterized by compassion. We read in Psalm 103 that just as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. If you're a parent, an aunt or uncle, if your friends have kids, it's your heart can pour out for when your children are frightened or in pain. Just as that father has compassion for the earthly children, so the Lord has compassion on us. In Matthew, it says that when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless people like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus on earth feels human emotion. He expresses this. He is characterized by this emotion of compassion. And one of the simplest Bible verses in the entire scriptures is Jesus wept. Two words, John 11:35. But Jesus wept. He expresses physical emotion, his compassion for his friend Lazarus that has passed away, and for the family that is mourning the loss of a close friend. The emotion, the compassion that Jesus feels is overwhelming and manifests itself physically on him. So God is characterized by compassion, but he calls us to be characterized by compassion as well. In Zechariah 7, it says, "This is what the Lord Almighty says. Administer true justice. Show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner, the poor. Do not plot evil against each other." Show mercy and compassion to one another. We're supposed to be demonstrating this emotion to one another. And to go even further than that, in the New Testament, in the letter to the Colossians, we read, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." Yes, God is characterized by compassion. He calls us into the same thing, that we are expected to feel this for our neighbors, for the people around us. We are supposed to be clothed in This is something that people can observe in our character when they see us. And finally, Ephesians is be. So, yes, we're supposed to express it. We're supposed to characterize it. We're supposed to be. That is what we're supposed to become, is being kind and compassionate to one another. And then Jesus has answered that question of what does one another mean very clearly in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Forgiving each other just as in Christ God, he forgave you. All right, so we're digging into this topic of compassion, and it's pretty funny. My wife thought it was pretty funny, but I was going to be talking about compassion. So I'll let you in on a little secret. So this is something called a Strengthsfinder. So I worked for a corporation before, and what this does, it's a personality test of sorts. It kind of tells you how you show up in stressful situations. Like, what do you lead with to help you through those situations? There's 34 possibilities, and this is in right order. And there's empathy for me, 33. So you can take it down now. I think people are gonna,
come on.
a lot of people are going to that. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. I know that. So, but it's interesting, though I don't naturally align with this character trait, I mean, this is no different than what God calls us into so many things. God calls us to try and to obey in so many things that we will not be perfect at. There are so many areas where God says that we won't be perfect, where we are fighting it against in areas of the flesh oppressors. And so it's no different for me. It's not my strength, but I'll tell you a story about where it came into play for me. And it just shows us that God won't test us beyond what we can bear, and also God will provide these opportunities to fulfill his callings for us. That was sharing about Gospel Street Mission. We lived in New Jersey for a while, for about 10 years, and there was a organization in downtown Morristown called the Market Street Mission. So this is a picture of what you see from the street, the Market Street Mission. The Market Street Mission, similar to what we have the Gospel Street Mission here in Kalamazoo, cares for immediate needs today and long-term needs for stable, independent tomorrow through like emergencies, so that's homelessness, addiction recovery, counseling, and also they conduct their open chapel. Their addiction programs are 8 to 12 month recovery programs where they do things like education and vocational training so that these individuals can get back and rebuild their lives. There's a history of addiction in my family, and when we were living in New Jersey, there was a period of time where it was a valley for that for a few of my family members, and it was really difficult being 2,000 miles away, and 2,800 miles away? How far is New Jersey away? 13 hours away. So it was like at the drop of a hat, I can't just really, drive halfway across the country and come home, so it was really tough for me. But we were going to church at a place called Mendham Hills, and Mendham Hills Community Church there had partnered with Market Street Mission. And so we went down for chapel on Sunday evening. We had a Sunday evening service just like this one. So a Sunday evening service, they would get out, and then our chaser was we would take some of the men that would voluntarily wanted to come hang out, talk about what the message they heard, talk about what a life in Christ looks like, and really just socialize with someone who was outside of this program. And so there was a group of guys that said they were doing this, and I felt compelled to go do this. And so we would meet up with a group of guys, we would take them out for dinner, and in New Jersey there's a lot of diners, so it was really more like breakfast. It was like 7 p.m. pancakes, so I thought it was pretty fantastic. There was a young man there, and this is over 10 years ago now, so not some young man anymore. His name was Kyle, and that was also significant to me because that's my younger brother's name. So there was really this collision of worlds, this God thing happening in me, and I had a soft spot where maybe I can't be there for my family, but I could be the person being there for this individual. And Kyle, the first 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure that we hung out, I never saw him smile, and then we would talk with one in front of his face, things like that. Thought maybe it was just some social anxiety. And then finally, the fourth week we were hanging out, I saw why. He smiled, someone said something funny, and he smiled, and Kyle was in rehab for addiction to methamphetamine. So I didn't put it up on the slide. You can Google it on your own time. So he was really suffering from what's called meth mouth. I mean, his dental hygiene was just destroyed. And he was embarrassed by it because when you would see that, you would make some immediate assumptions about the person that he was. And he talked to me a little bit about that. And so we felt compelled as a church family. We helped him save up for, donated part of the money so he could have some dental work done and get some implants, some prosthetics in. And I remember total change from like not smiling for 3 weeks. I'm pretty sure he did not stop smiling for about 3 weeks after he had all that work done. And I had compassion for him. Compassion moves us to care. And caring for someone, getting to know someone deeply doesn't necessarily mean you're a sucker, like you're going to fall for a scam. Having compassion for someone doesn't make you weak, but it will make you vulnerable, and that's hard. That's hard. You got to put yourself out there. And then when you do that, it makes you want to care for that person. And that's really where we come now. It's compassion is really what moves us to care. Time's up. I'm only halfway done. So care defined. So care is a noun. Don't get me wrong. I can care. I can have this emotional thing, but I'm talking, so I'm just going to use the verbs right now. So it's an active word, care. I mean, it doesn't really say in the New Testament in the translations like Jesus cared about the people. It says he had compassion. He had emotional feelings for them, and then he cares. He does something about it. He looks after and provides for the needs of. And so compassion and investing in relationships, engaging with our circles, is what's going to help us develop those relationships, which is going to drive us to wanting to care. And Jesus shows this in his ministry. In Matthew chapter 20, it says, as Jesus and the disciples were leaving Jericho again, a large crowd followed him. There were 2 blind men sitting by the roadside, and when they heard Jesus going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." But the crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. And they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." So Jesus stopped and he called to them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and he cares for them. And he touched their eyes and immediately restored their sight. Compassion, he feels, he meets these people where they are. They are being pushed away by the crowd of just these blind men on the side. Be quiet, you're distracting him. And he engages with them. He sees the person, not the stereotype, and then cares for them. In Matthew chapter 14, it says, when Jesus heard what was happening, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. And I think this is on the small lake, inland sea, the Sea of Galilee, I think it is. Is that right? Yes. And he takes the boat, so he's in a boat, and he's going to get away from the crowd. He's going to go to a solitary place. So he hears all of what's going on. He withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. And hearing this, the crowds followed him. So he's, rowboat, he's like trying to get away from the crowd, get a little break. And the crowd, you can see him like running down the shore, like chasing him along. And when Jesus landed and saw the crowd, he could have been perturbed. He could have needed a break. He probably did. But it says he had compassion on them and he cared for them. He healed them. And there's one more here. One more. A man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. "If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. "I am willing," he said, "be healed." Instantly the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. Compassion and care. And he calls us as a people into the same pattern. In Proverbs 19, it says, "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." We are God's people, and when we care for those among us, we are caring for God himself. Philippians chapter 2 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. And I think you see the pattern here, but one more for you. In 1 Peter, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you receive to serve others. As faithful stewards, so God has blessed us. These are gifts we receive. Be faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Jesus demonstrates this pattern of compassion, of his heart pouring out, being vulnerable to the people around him in his ministry, and he responds with care, caring after the physical needs that they have. And we are called into the same pattern. But how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, I'd say the first thing is, and this is going to feel a little bit like a leadership message, maybe, is like care about yourself. I mean, we learn this outside of like, I can't care for others unless I care for myself first. I say the same thing here. Care for yourself. Get to understand the fact that you are an adopted child of God, and that is what defines your image more than anything else. Your identity is anchored in that more than anything else. Care for yourself. Become equipped by that. Join a huddle. Understand and walk through this with a few other people so that you can develop and feel ready to have compassion and care for others and get to know others. We've got a lot of opportunities here we talked about in October to engage in gatherings. It doesn't have to be anything you're not doing already, but when you're there, actually engage. Put yourself out there. Be vulnerable. There are so many great things coming up. You can check out our Facebook page. I think a lot of you listed there. Like, they're already set up for you. All you have to do is show up. And I think the last one is be present. I heard a great quote this week at work, is be where your feet are. And be willing to be interrupted. You know, so much of we have, I think to this parable of the Good Samaritan, and he's walking home. Like, so much of our life is characterized by this in-between time, right? I'm driving to church, right? Or I'm driving home from work, or I used to travel on a previous job, so like when they're in the airport, it's like this in-between time. I'm just going somewhere else, and that time is just lost. It's like, I have to get to practice, my son to practice. I have to get to that. I have to get to the grocery store. But like being present and like recognizing that the people around you all have a story to tell. And they might be hurting. And that's hard. Be prepared to encounter God. He'll meet you there. And you can develop deep relationships, and that's what's going to lead you to care. This sounds good. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit compelled. We're going to ratchet that up a little bit here. Where's the call to action? So care is an active verb. And we began this with that phrase from Tom Swanson, do I look like I care? And I just challenge it. God doesn't want you to look like you care. God wants you to act like you care. I'm going to show you a clip from a movie. The movie's called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. It's a Tina Fey movie. So in this movie, a little bit of context. So Tina Fey is playing an American journalist named Kim Baker. She's on assignment in Afghanistan. And so in the early part of the movie, she lands in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and she's being chauffeured, ushered through downtown to where she's going to be residing, and she's in a little bit of culture shock. And as she gets out of the transport and she's being taken to where she'll live, there's a boy in the street, and he's crying because he's dropped a tray full of eggs. And she feels for him, and she reaches to grab her wallet, and her chaperone reassures her, grabs her arm and says, don't, it's a scam. Same kid, every day, same eggs. So she develops a relationship with another character, Ian McAlpee, played by Martin Freeman. And we're going to look at this scene where they're walking through the same marketplace she had just been in 2 months earlier, and this takes place.
Ja, it's a scam.
I know it's a scam, okay, so what? still begging in the street. There's no way.
I do that video. The rest of the movie's okay. This scene really impacted me when I saw it. I mean, I love that line. I thought about that for days afterwards. Like, I know it's a scam. Like, it doesn't change the fact that he's begging in the streets. I remember being on vacation. My twin brother got married to a woman who was from Guatemala, so they had the wedding down in Guatemala. And I remember walking through these little shops on the street, and they're talking about, well, you can barter with them, or you can negotiate a better price. And my cousin's like trying to talk him down. It's like, so I'm buying a flute, like a wooden flute, and it's like, it's $5. He's like, well, I talked him down to whatever the conversion is. I talked him down to $2, and I'm like, these guys have to go home. And, like, what's $5? Like, I'm gonna haggle with an artist and an art. Like, it's interesting the perspective of like, so what if it's a scam? Poor kids begging in the streets. So what if they're going to charge you a little bit more than the last tourist? You're not a sucker. It's an interesting perspective to have. Do we have enough compassion for that person and what they're putting on the line to care for them? So if compassion is what moves us to act, it's very similar to the model that God has in other words. Like, belief is what leads us to obedience. We're not called to be obedient to the law until we believe. We're not called, in this case, to act until we have compassion. We want to have the right motives on the inside. In fact, we're warned against acting with the wrong motives. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says directly, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Whether it's giving and talking about or praying, he says, it's not about the show. In Matthew chapter 23, he just lays into the Pharisees and Sadducees with the 7 woes. And he says, woe to you this, woe to you that. And he talks about how all of them look like whitewashed tombs. They look proper and upright and pious. They look like they care on the outside, but they cast heavy burdens, and they don't care for the weakest in their society. Jesus says, don't be like that. Now, I want to pause here, because I'm not saying that you should leave here and give all of your money to the first charity case that you encounter. You need a little bit of discernment. I understand that. But we make excuses. We do. And there's oftentimes that our actions just don't match up with our intentions. And that's what we really need to work on. You know, we see these stereotypes, and can we see through that and understand the person? Someone's begging in the street, and we walk by, something in the back of our head, like, I'm not going to give them money, we're just going to spend it on alcohol. And then maybe we buy a $6 pint of our friend's microbrew. We say, you know, they just waste their money on things like sneakers, phones. And then we upgrade our iPhone and we buy a new phone case. What we're going to do is kind of end today with taking a little bit of time to reflect. I am not very good at sitting still. And being still before the Lord can be uncomfortable. So we need to practice that. And let's focus on a specific thing. We're going to take some time and be still. Where has God been trying to get your attention? Where have we been too busy? Like, we haven't been where our feet were. We're just in this between activities. Where have we been too distracted to feel compassion and let God soften our hearts? Where have we been too distracted and missed the chance to reach out with care? We're going to play a song in the background. It's called Give Me Your Eyes by Brandon Heath. I used to sing this to my kids. So it's an older song, right? So when Audrey, my oldest 10-year-old, was little, I used to sing it to her, and she went to sleep. It's significant. And the video, we're not going to watch the music video. It's not a great video, but it takes place at the airport. It's really like this. He's looking around and just there's people walking around that have a story, and some of them are hurting. But if we don't take time to see and engage the world through God's eyes, we miss that. And when we miss that compassion, we don't want to care. Care with a verb, right? So I ask you to take some time right now and just be still before the Lord. We're going to put this song on in the background for the house music. And when we are finished with that and reflecting, hopefully God moves your hearts, moves you. Is there someone I need to look? Maybe there's someone He's going to set you up for outside of this today, this week, this month. And I hope so, that you're prepared, that compassion in the heart, and to care.